Morning, even afternoon, we got a banger for y'all today, baby. Got a video from Ornery here. As always, putting his YouTube in the description. Be sure to go check out Ornery, man. He makes great videos. This is him kind of posing the question and ranking what the best state of Warzone was. I want y'all to hit me in the comments section. Let me know what you think about what Ornery says here, what I say, and what y'all think was the best version of Warzone we got. Hope y'all enjoy this, man. If you do, hit the like, hit the sub. Most importantly, be sure to tell somebody you love them. I'll catch you in the next one.
Warzone has now spawned over 5 different games. With those games come new metas, maps, and a lot of change. Some were definitely better than others. I'm Ornery, and today we will rank every era of Warzone. I know it's
okay, me personally, let me get my opinion in here. This might be a hot take. I am going very beginning of Verdansk era. That, in my opinion, was the best time. No one really knew what they were doing. There wasn't necessarily, like, everyone was just, you know, everyone was kind of a bot, myself included, right? I remember running around with the M4 and the RPG. That was, like, what I thought was good. That moment, in my opinion, was the best state of Warzone.
kind of cheap, but I'm going to try and keep things objective as possible through the lens of the community. But I still have my opinions as well. As far as what makes a good era of Warzone, I think it comes down to how fun and playable the game is. Whether it be the gameplay changes made, good and balanced metas, memorable Easter eggs, and sheer amount of content and support for the game, let me know what your favorite era of Warzone is and why.
Very beginning of Verdansk. Number 5. So this is the worst one. So this should be start of Warzone 2 for me. I'm gonna do my own little list. So start of Warzone 2, like right when you can land like top dome.
Vanguard may have been one of the most despised Call of Duty.
Wow. I didn't mind Caldera that much.
But was surprisingly polarizing when it came to Warzone. Myself wasn't the biggest fan. Please just hear me out on this. I'm not asking you to agree with me, but this state of Warzone was far from perfect for a lot of reasons. Start with the launch, where we got Caldera. This is probably dead last when it comes to Warzone maps for most people. On top of being a bad map, we were forced to play it, which eventually would blossom into the absolute trash can playlist that we have today. Also on Caldera, you had the introduction of planes, which was an awful and broken integration that
I would say that this was better than beginning of Warzone 2. If that's like when you had that whole backpack system, the slow movement, I would rather have had Caldera.
No one was asking for. Once we got settled into the Vanguard era, it was clear.
I mean, that's Cooper Carbine. I didn't mind that. Like, there's guns that I liked. There was stuff I enjoyed in this.
See that all Vanguard guns were leaps and bounds better than any Cold War gun, especially since they all supported 10 attachments. This is where I had my main problem with the Vanguard era was its metas. Every single gun during this time was a low recoil, high damage beam. On top of this, leveling up Vanguard guns took forever, especially if you didn't have the base game. And if you did have the base game, you were pretty much...
What's that LMG with the... had the magazine on the side.
Forced into playing it, which was just torture. Anyways, I know a lot of people's favorite metas were during this time, but I simply could not get behind them. You want to sit here and tell me that the Cooper Carbine, PPSH, STG, Bren, and every gun caught in the Vanguard Wall of Death were balanced? But beyond the metas and being forced to play an awful map, we would have other awful decisions and implementations that would ruin the game. For starters, the infamous sniper nerf. This change was kind of all over the place and really targeted the quickscope meta that was just the Swiss K3 and Kar 98. All it did was give those snipers a one-shot range. Before they would one-shot at any range, but now they would have to be within, I think, like 25 or 30 meters, meaning you really could only use these guns as quickscope machines. It did sort of incentivize using guns like the HDR and AX-50 since they would still one-shot at any range, so I guess that was cool. But meanwhile, guns like the Ride-Tech and M82 still couldn't, and those were very slow and remained worthless. Anyways, that change would carry over to Warzone 2, but even worse, which we'll talk about here in a second. However, Fortune's Keep is without a doubt a highlight in the whole Vanguard Warzone era. I know a lot of people still prefer Rebirth like I do too, but Fortune's Keep definitely holds its own when it comes to the Resurgence maps. I know for a lot of people, this was the most fun a lot of people were having when it came to Warzone. It's arguably when Rebirth was at its absolute peak. And I'm not saying I didn't have fun during this state, but for me, it personally just didn't hit as hard as the other ones.
All right. Number 4, I would probably go... I'm just doing my own list here. Well, I'm kind of confused, right? Because you had Verdansk, you had Caldera, you had Warzone 2, then you have what we have today. So I must be missing something. I mean, for me, I'd say current Warzone, like what we got right now. So I'd go Warzone 2, this Warzone, and then I'd probably go Caldera, and then I think the best is the very beginning of Verdansk. Let's see what happens. I must be missing something.
I can already hear the Warzone mob at my doorstep as I put Warzone 2 over Vanguard Warzone, but once again, just...
I'm not a mob, Ornery. I am fat, though.
hear me out. No
I'm not mad
denying
at
this
you.
was without a doubt the worst engine that
I'm not mad at you. I'm just disappointed.
Warzone had ever been played on, which is very important to note. Horrible movement, clunky gunplay, and AI around every corner. It was just bad. I even made an entire video breaking down Warzone 2's failure. But there are some things that made it redeemable. Start with the maps, which I think all three were phenomenal. Mazur is a great map that gets super underappreciated and somewhat hated on, and I think that's only because it exists on Warzone 2. I bet if you threw this on the rotation with Warzone 3, people would enjoy it. Ashika was controversial and hated on, but I find this to be another great map that is sadly no longer with us. I think if you crank up the brightness and vibrance, you're good to go. Layout is not bad by any means. Then there's Vanguard, which is neck and neck with Rebirth Island for a lot of people. Me personally, it's actually my least favorite of the 3 Warzone maps on Warzone 2, but still really good. Anyways, maps aside, let's talk about the big changes going on here. And they're really big. Main one was no one-shot snipers whatsoever. Took the whole Vanguard sniper nerf and raised it to a sniper
that's another reason this was
definitely went down as one of, if not the worst decision in all of Warzone. Taking a core fundamental aspect to not only COD, but any FPS at that, and just throw it down the drain. They would try and undo
one-shot snipers existed from H1Z1 Battle Royale. Like, you could one-shot someone with a sniper. It's like a core mechanic in Battle Royales, even if you don't love it.
This mess by eventually allowing some snipers to one-shot, but only with the explosive ammo, which nuked your velocity to the ground, making them impossible to use. Anyways, another change was the looting getting a complete overhaul. At launch, we know the infamous backpack looting system that was horrible, but eventually got simplified into the looting system we have today, which I think is perfect. On a side note, this looting system is rumored to go away once Black Ops 6 integration happens, which kind of makes me sad. I love being able to stow extra kill streaks, munitions boxes, armor boxes, whatever. It makes it feel way more like a battle royale. Regardless of what's happening in the future, this was one of the best changes to Warzone that I didn't even know it needed at the time. You could dig into how bad the gunplay is, since the visual recoil is still being worked on to make the Warzone 2 guns viable in Warzone 3, with still little to no progress in that regard, which is all the evidence you really need to understand how bad it was. And the movement was such a talking point that all I have to say is no slide canceling, no reload canceling, stims don't do anything, and for a minute there you couldn't even sprint while plating up. Through all this trash, there is one more highlight in Warzone 2, and that's the metas. I don't think I've seen such good metas in a 1-year spawn of Warzone as I have with Warzone 2. Kick things off with the RPK, which is one of the easiest guns to use and felt really good all around, just to kind of like get us familiar with the game. Then saw the RAL, which was a high risk, high reward gun that you had to control recoil. The Hemlock AR, which I think is one of the best and most fun ARs in all of Warzone, and I think there's a lot of people who would agree with that. Cronin Squad was potentially one of the most balanced metas we have ever seen as well. And you have the Lockman 5.56, which some people were comparing to the Launch Growl. For a game with horrible gunplay, the metas actually made it a little bit more enjoyable.
I agree with all that. So what am I missing here? There must be some...
Next under the ranking, we have the current era, which is Warzone 3 or Warzone 2.5, MW3 Warzone, or whatever you want to call it. Now, I really couldn't tell you what the overall consensus from the community is, but I have been having a lot of fun with Warzone during this state. There are moments where it actually feels like the devs are listening to us and taking responsibility for the horrible decisions from the last 2 years. Movement is back where it once was, gunplay is much better, and we've even gotten small quality of life changes like the removal of overkill. These changes does not bring all sunny skies and rainbows, however. For starters, throughout the entire year, we've only gotten one map, and that's Urzikstan. Now, Urzikstan isn't a bad map by any means, but it definitely is not the best. I already said my piece on Al-Mazrah, but they could at least throw it into the rotation, since they clearly haven't been working on any new maps for us to play. Give us some variety when it comes to Battle Royale. On the other hand, we did get Rebirth back after a year and a half, so that obviously was a huge win and something that the community desperately wanted. Things like the Car 98 making a return are other signs that deep down inside, Raven does have a heart. There have been a handful of new concepts like Ranked Resurgence, which I personally think works better than Ranked Battle Royale. It's given people more gratification to grind Warzone, whereas before there really wasn't. It was more so like how many kills can you get. Another change is that when something is game breaking, like the snake shots, DG conversion kit, and Renetti, they have been lightning fast to not only fix it, but before fixing them, just remove them from the game entirely. Before it would last for at least a week or two. Sniping has now evolved from no one-shots to this middle ground where the fast snipers can still one-shot at further ranges while being outgunned by slower and harder to use snipers with infinite range. Apparently Warzone 2 snipers are about to start one-shotting without explosive ammo as well, and I'm really excited to see what that does to sniping. It obviously is trying to undo the damage of Warzone 2, which is difficult, but it has done a great job at that and seems to be getting better with each season. But it also still has its other downsides. The first being that we have a terrible cheating problem that has only gotten worse, especially with MW3 coming to Game Pass. Any ranked game is like a coin flip as if you're gonna have a cheater in it, which obviously ruins the game for everyone. Their weak spot in Warzone 3 is its metas. I think most people agree that they've become extremely stale and just repetitive. But nothing but LMGs that all feel the exact same, just a different gun. As far as ARs, we've only had the Ram 7 until most recently when we got the STG. We saw one of the most broken guns in all of Warzone being the Interceptor as well, which was like DMR flashbacks. I will say the HRM9 was one of the most fun and balanced SMGs we've seen, but that meta just lasted way too long and also ran its course on the community. Can briefly mention the Season 1 Reloaded debacle where people straight up just couldn't load it in the game, and those that did couldn't use their perks or even access their loadout. Obviously not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things, but without a doubt the worst update in Warzone history and completely unacceptable. But if we can continue this trend we're on currently, with some improvement and diversity in the meta, the Black Ops 6 integration is looking really nice.
So what am I missing here? Because Verdansk is going to be number one, right? Ornery, there's no way. I got to be missing something.
Now we're at the second most enjoyable state of Warzone. I want to lead with the fact that for the
okay, I see what he's doing. So
the entirety of Cold War era, Rebirth Island and Verdansk were always playable.
Yes.
Think about that for a minute. Anyways, I could write a book as to why Rebirth and Verdansk are the two best maps in all of Warzone, but that would be beating a dead horse. I mean, it's pretty evident with Warzone 3 that when Rebirth was brought back, it was one of the greatest updates of all time. Verdansk also got its 1984 reskin, which many people like more than the traditional map, but I'll let you guys argue about that in the comments section. Moving forward, probably the one and only thing keeping me from putting this at number one was the existence of the DMR meta. Go ahead and say this was one of the worst metas we had ever seen in Warzone and made the game unplayable and unenjoyable. Sniping, mid-range, and even close-range engagements were completely ruined. Anyways, that was at the launch of Cold War Zone, but pretty much every meta after that was one people really enjoyed. And this had the FFAR. What else do I need to say here? Another really cool feature about the Cold War integration was that the Modern Warfare guns were still usable and were actually still getting updates to that game, which meant more guns to come. But a lot of you didn't know that the Psychov was added to Modern Warfare 2019 months after Cold War launch, which is something that we haven't seen since. Then guns like the AMAX were a meta contender for the entirety of Cold War, despite being a Modern Warfare 19 gun. Compare that to today, where if you load up in Warzone with just about any MW2 gun, you're going to be at a massive disadvantage. Then we had legendary events like the 80s Action Hero event, where we could get massive POIs added to the game that shook up your experience. Cold War took the gameplay of Warzone and didn't make any dramatic changes, which was just for the better. We're still playing on the exact same engine, only now we had a brand new map with Resurgence, which would obviously become a hearsay that the community had fallen in love with and brought in a ton of new players while doing so.
I mean, this is peak Verdansk, right? It was what I fully agree. That's what I was saying. It was the very beginning of Verdansk. Come on now,
is this really that surprising?
It was a launch,
just before we were struck with the pandemic, we were given one of the greatest things to use with this newfound free time, that being Warzone. Launch Warzone quickly became a worldwide phenomenon that was everybody's go-to game for the majority of the pandemic. The new battle royale inside the COD franchise, there was a lot of hype surrounding it, and it delivered. New concept being a 1v1 gulag to get back in the fight was a
I gotta pause here and say this still to this day is one of the best integrations they've ever had. Like this idea of the gulag 1v1 in the state of battle royale where there's a lot of like variables, you just have a 1v1 mono. When they changed it in Warzone 2 where there was some RNG to it, I couldn't stand it, bro. This gulag was so good and one of my favorite parts of Warzone as a BR.
Very refreshing take on what people saw as a dead genre at the time. Anyways, we only had Verdansk until Cold War to come along, and people were okay with that. With 150 players to keep the pacing right. Why we haven't had 150 players on our big maps anymore, but I think that helped out Verdansk big time. On top of this, we had some fan favorite metas. The Grau, the Kilo, the Bruin, the M13, the MP5, the Kar 98, HDR, and several others.
Really
on top of this, we also had a lot of brokenness going on. Snake shots being the first of 3 separate iterations that were completely overpowered. Infamous FAMAS underbarrel shotgun that might as well acted as a sniper. Thermal scope meta making sniping easier than ever before. AS Val being able to shoot through the entire map while maintaining its damage. These massive bugs, exploits, mistakes, or whatever you want to call them gave us a very memorable experience and was hitting that Modern Warfare 2 2009 brokenness, which gave that game some charm. On top of this, this was the most content we've ever gotten in such a small period of time. The keycard bunkers, which were an awesome addition. Then after that, it seemed like there was always a new Easter egg to complete that always gave you something to do. Bunker 11 had some zombie Easter egg depth to it that gave you exclusive content. Hidden Subway was another in-depth Easter egg that I couldn't even imagine being in Warzone today. Zombie Royale, which had become a mainstay in Warzone every Halloween. Way more limited time and experimental modes that always gave us something new. Maybe it's nostalgia, but and I'm sure a lot of you will agree that launch Warzone was like catching lightning in a bottle that continued into Cold War for a little bit, but then has been lost since. Hopefully Black Ops 6 can continue to undo the damage of Vanguard and Cold War, but I guess we'll see. Let me know what you guys think. Once again, this is just my opinion. opinion, and I tried to keep things objective through the community's eyes. But I would love to know what your all's favorite state of Warzone was, so go ahead and drop your ranking down below. If you want to hear me talk about forgotten metas, the entire history of the Gulag, snipers, or shotguns, go ahead and click here. Join my Discord if you're feeling crazy, and if you liked, leave a like. If you didn't, leave a dislike, and thank you so much for watching.
I think the only one I flip is him with Caldera. I did not enjoy the launch of Warzone 2, but it is so interesting to think back to that peak Warzone, man. I don't know if we'll ever recapture that, truly. And it sucks. It's like that moment. I wish I was new. I wish I knew I was living in that moment, and it was one of those, like, you know, this is going to be one of the like greatest things you're going to play. You know what I mean? Because that beginning of Verdansk, man, I don't know. Maybe BO6 can bring it back. Who knows?